subscribe.
Hello, Ken, please. Please, can I help you?
Hello, yeah, I've just seen somebody stabbed.
Where?
This is the actual recording of someone who has just witnessed the stabbing of a young man. Within an hour of this call, the victim was pronounced dead, prompting a worldwide manhunt.
There was two guys having a fight, and I saw a guy in a Range Rover pull a knife out of his right-hand pocket and stab the guy in a red van in the chest.
This is the story of that manhunt. It's a story not only of murder, but of stolen gold and the notorious killing of a policeman. A manhunt that would lead the police to come face to face with a past they had wanted to forget. The Swanley roundabout in Kent, where the M25 and M20 meet, is one of Europe's busiest roundabouts. Monitored here at Kent Police's traffic centre, thousands of cars pass through it every day. On Sunday the 19th of May, 1996, the roundabout was the scene of a crime that sent shockwaves through the country. John Saunders is a lorry driver. On that Sunday, he was finishing his milk farm rounds in Kent. He was driving along the A20 towards the Swanley roundabout.
Come around there every day, 7 days a week, every week for about 2 years, so I knew the road pretty much like the back of my hand, even down to the sequencing of the traffic lights on the junction.
At the same time, 17-year-old Danielle and 21-year-old Stephen were heading for the same roundabout. It was Stephen's idea to buy bagels in London. Danielle had only recently passed her driving test. Approaching the Swanley roundabout, she was attempting her first motorway outing in Stephen's Red Rascal van.
I came down to the junction, first set was on green. Oh yeah, this is good. I knew that if the first set I came to was on green, I could pretty much rely on getting around the whole lot without stopping.
At the very point John Saunders was approaching the traffic lights, according to Danielle, she was forced to brake sharply as a Land Rover Discovery cut in front of them.
The driver of the Discovery gets out, as did the passenger of the van. I'm thinking, oh, what's going on here? They walk round, meet each other between the two vehicles, and they seem to be having some sort of discussion. As I get a little nearer, it breaks into a fight. So I thought, well, if I use the size of my vehicle, kind of try and scare them into reality, hoot at them, you know, they might come to their senses. And it had absolutely no effect. So I pulled up just clear of the junction, dialed 999 on the mobile phone. All the time I was watching them in the mirror. I could see they were still fighting, punching, kicking. As I'm speaking to the police on the phone, I see the older of the two gentlemen punch the younger man and to punch him in the chest. This bloke, the younger man, sort of slumped to the floor. I thought, oh, that was a hard blow, he's winded him. The older man then strode purposefully back to his vehicle, got in, and drove off.
John Saunders got out of his lorry to see if there was anything he could do, and found that others too had stopped to offer help. Danielle was hysterical.
She was screaming, Steve, don't go, don't leave me, Steve. Which was about the only coherent thing I could make. She was absolutely hysterical. His complexion was sort of almost deathly white. His eyes were rolled. He wasn't moving, he wasn't saying anything. He was just very ill.
But Stephen was not ill. He was dying. The punch to the chest was made with a knife, not a fist. Stephen had been fatally stabbed through the heart and through the liver. Another witness who had seen the fight tried to follow the Land Rover Discovery as it took off up the slip road to the M25. He called 999 from his car phone.
I saw a guy in a Range Rover pull a knife out of his right-hand pocket and stab the guy in a red van in the chest.
Have you got the index of the Range Rover?
It was L964 something, I didn't catch the line.
Right, what colour was it?
It was a sort of bluey green. I'm not 100% sure yet because it was just such a shock.
Right.
He was weaving in and out of the traffic.
And the person in the red van, do they require an ambulance, do you know?
Well,
Once this witness lost sight of the Land Rover Discovery, the car disappeared into the Sunday afternoon traffic, never to be seen again. The story electrified Britain.
Just yards from the M25 motorway, a murder hunt is underway after what appears to have been an horrific attack of so-called road rage. The driver of this red Bedford van was the victim, stabbed in the chest by another motorist who stopped his Land Rover Discovery alongside on this motorway slip road. Police are searching the area for clues to the attacker. They'll also study videotapes from dozens of surveillance cameras along the motorway.
The tearful 17-year-old Danielle moved the nation with her appeals for the killer of her fiancé. Her face is hidden as she is under witness protection.
Steve came out and said he stabbed me down, get his number plate. And I called the number plate out to him and I just went and held him. He just looked at me as if to say, please help me, and there was nothing I could do.
This is the victim's vehicle. There's a considerable amount of blood staining on the road around the vehicle.
The crime scene confronting the police was recorded on this police video, but there was no forensic evidence. The blood soaking the road was Stephen's, not the killer's. There was no weapon, no DNA, nothing to identify the killer. But the crime had been committed in broad daylight. There were hundreds of people in their cars passing through Swanley roundabout. 29 had given witness statements, and the police were able to build up an e-fit of the killer. No one doubted the case would soon be solved. The job of solving this crime would fall to Detective Superintendent Nick Biddis.
It's probably one of those that you would have thought, on the face of it, 1:20 on a Sunday, busiest roundabout in the world, the M25, quite a few witnesses that perhaps it would have been fairly straightforward to have traced the driver of the vehicle.
But it was turning out to be far from straightforward. The camera on the Swanley intersection was not set up to record, and on the day of the murder was not even working. And despite the hundreds of calls, there was no good lead on the real identity of the killer from the e-fit. And of the many witnesses, no one had taken the full number plate of the Land Rover Discovery. Initial police optimism of a quick arrest vanished, as surely as the killer himself.
I think it was a case of everybody, somebody, nobody. Everybody thought somebody may have got the registration number of the vehicle, but nobody did.
The police didn't even know the colour of the car.
Different witnesses describing it as a maroon one, a green one, a blue one, a grey one, a black one. But of course the way the sunlight probably hits these metallic vehicles, they do look different. The only thing we could be sure of, reasonably sure of, it was an L-registered Land Rover Discovery.
From the start, the police were under pressure from both the press and the public to get results. Ian Edmondson and Gary Jones were journalists at the News of the World.
The police were, I think, very frustrated because they thought that they would have the name of the killer and would be able to catch that person very, very quickly. That someone would get the number plate, that they'd recognise the car, and all this information would flood in.
The task facing the police was daunting. There were 17,000 L-Reg Land Rover discoveries in the National Police computer, any one of which could have been the killer's. But which one? It was like looking for a needle in a haystack. But what seemed an overwhelming task brought an early breakthrough. One of the first local addresses they came across was that of an Anthony Francis of Bridgen Road, and yet Anthony Francis was nowhere to be found.
After checking dozens of vehicles and taking thousands of statements, detectives have appealed for help in tracing one particular vehicle and its owner.
A Land Rover Discovery, dark blue, grey. The registration, which is L794 JTF.
The vehicle has been traced to this address in Bexley, 10 miles from the murder scene. Its registered owner, an Anthony Francis, described as in his 20s or early 30s and stockily built, vanished several weeks ago.
There was one person who would never forget the name Anthony Francis, ex-flying squad officer Anthony Brightwell.
The Kent police made it known that they were looking for a man called Tony Francis in connection with the Land Rover that was at the scene of the murder of Cameron. I was absolutely, totally shocked that this name was mentioned, amazed in fact, because I immediately recognised this as an alias of Kenneth Noye.
Was the Anthony Francis the police were looking for really just another name for a face from the past? Kenny Noye, a man whose wealth and criminal history had occupied the headlines of the 1980s. The possibility seemed beyond belief. Kenny Noye was the stuff of legend. His parents had moved from the gritty Dockland areas of southeast London to more suburban Bexley, and it was here that Kenneth Noye grew up. He spent a year's stretch at Borstal for receiving stolen cars, but sharp business deals in property and gold soon changed his fortunes, and he built Hollywood Cottage in Kent. Hollywood Cottage was not a cottage, but a mansion in 11 acres of land.
Extreme wealth, extreme visible wealth. He moved in the same social circles as certain members of the Kent police. He dined with certain members of the Kent police.
But it was his connections to Britain's top criminals that made his name in the 1980s, when he was put on trial for killing a policeman and handling the gold from the biggest bullion theft ever seen in Britain. But was Noye really the same person as the Anthony Francis the police were looking for? Old mortgage documents in the name of Anthony Francis, obtained by Kent police, soon confirmed Francis was indeed an alias for Noye. There were clear prints on the documents that matched the prints stored in the National Police records. Another piece to the jigsaw fell into place when the police found out that Kenneth Noye had gone missing.
Vehicles disappeared, he's disappeared. Didn't take too much to work out that he was very high then on our priority list for interview.
There was one other piece of evidence that fell into place. By tracing the positions of the calls made on Kenneth Noye's mobile phone on the day of the murder, the police were able to plot his journey. Noye had been at the right place at the right time. From the moment Noye's name entered the frame, the challenge for the police was to keep it out of the press.
Well, I got a call from an old contact of mine who I'd speak to him about crime stories and had done for years. And he called me one afternoon, it was late in the week, and he sounded very nervous. And he told me he didn't want to speak on the telephone. And we arranged to meet that night in a pub near Greenwich. And over a few drinks he said, "You'll never guess who killed Stephen Cameron." And I said, "Well, yeah." And he said, "Kenny Noye." And I just remember my jaw hitting the ground, thinking it's incredible that someone like Kenny Noye could get caught up in all that.
The guy from the News of the World's ringing me up asking me to confirm whether or not we were seeking to interview Kenny Noye in relation to the M25. I told him quite clearly it was not my policy to discuss any individual that we may seek in relation to this or any other murder inquiry at the stage we were at.
He was shocked and surprised that we had this information, and you could almost hear his brain whirring with the sound that, oh my God, this throws our investigation completely out of sync, what are we going to do now? And his first reaction to me was, well, you can't possibly print it, can you? My first reaction was, well, we can possibly print it because we are going to do so.
Within 36 hours, there it was, on a national Sunday newspaper, the fact that Kent police were looking for Kenny Noye, together with a photograph of Kenny Noye. Not very helpful. I was livid. Absolutely livid.
The police investigation would never be the same again, for Kenny Noye had a past to conjure with, a past to mesmerise both press and public. And it starts with the biggest bullion heist of the century.
The bullion thieves forced their way into the top security depot beneath the Heathrow flight path just after 6 o'clock this morning. There were at least 6 of them, 3 armed with revolvers and automatic pistols.
It was 1983. The robbers had escaped with 3 tons of gold worth £26 million. Ronnie Knight, who was himself later questioned about the raid, was a club owner in Soho at the time. The robbery was the talk of the town.
People used to come in the club and that's all they used to talk about. What about that? Listen to that. Oh, I like to have a bit of that and things like that. You had it from everyone, you know. So it was one of the biggest things out. You know, everyone talked about it.
First on the scene at the Heathrow trading estate was Flying Squad Officer Tony Brightwell.
Chairs were thrown all over the place. Handcuffs were found. Ropes were found. There was a smell of petrol in the air. One could tell immediately that there'd been an armed robbery, and a violent armed robbery at that.
Look, he's made himself a cup of tea. Shut up.
The Brinks-Mat security guards had just started their work shift. They had consignments in the vaults of currency, diamonds and precious metals waiting to be shipped all over the world.
The guards were hit at speed, they were disorientated, shocked. Here were 3 armed men with masked faces, automatic weapons, shouting, continually shouting.
One guard was hit on the back of the head with a gun. Cloth bags were pulled over the guards' heads and petrol was poured over them. And then the armed robbers forced 2 of the guards to the vaults. In the vaults, the robbers forced the guards through the security gates and eventually through to the safes themselves. But then they hit a problem. One of the guards had forgotten the combination number.
He was shaking so much when he was asked to open the safes. He had a total mental block and couldn't recall the combination number that he had locked away somewhere.
Unable to get into the safes, it was almost an afterthought that they noticed the boxes lying on the floor. They had come across 2,670 kilos of gold, worth £26,370,000.
When you open up the box and you find all gold bars, well, God, Jesus. You're going to say, how are we going to get rid of it? How are we going to get it out of here?
The gold was in the form of pure gold bars, stamped with special markings. It would be immediately recognizable. The gold had to be melted down, and then it had to be got rid of. And for this, they needed someone who knew the business.
Noye was obviously a wheeler dealer at that time. A guy that was involved in fencing lorry loads, stolen lorry loads, fencing goods, placing goods, organising the disposal of goods. Very well connected, very cunning, but a serious background player.
Morning up.
Police first became suspicious of Kenneth Noye after he arrived in Jersey with £50,000 in £50 notes. He walked into a bank without an appointment and asked to buy £100,000 worth of gold. Noye was soon put under surveillance, and aerial photos were taken of Kenneth Noye's house. The grounds had old underground war bunkers and large stores. Could they hold the Brinks-Mat gold? Watching movements outside Hollywood Cottage, detectives began to suspect that the visits of a man called Brian Reeder involved a handover of the gold. A fateful decision was then taken that would tear the investigation apart. Neil Murphy was one of 2 officers picked to go undercover into the grounds of Hollywood Cottage at night to find out if a handover of the gold was taking place.
We were ready for a very boring evening shift. And within minutes of us being there, in fact the other 2 lads hadn't even gone home yet, within minutes of being there, Brian Reeder turned up. So it was action time.
Neil Murphy and his colleague John Fordham were trained in SAS rural surveillance techniques.
We got into the position that we were aiming for, which was a position quite close to like the corner of the house, so we could see 2 sides of the house, we could see the cars, and the sort of place we'd be aiming for to stay the night and watch what happened.
But Neil Murphy and John Fordham never got to stay the night, for barely had they got into position that things started to go wrong.
We'd gone into the property a good 150 yards or so when the dogs came and surprised us. And the dogs were around us, like, barking and jumping up at us, not biting us, but making a real noise. I thought personally that we're wasting our time here now, and Noye and Reeder's going to come out to investigate the noise. It seemed obvious to me that would happen. So I gave John a bit of a nod, although of course we're talking about it's very dark. I gave John a nod to tell him that I'm going to leave here, and I assumed that he was coming with me. I climbed up on the wall. Just as I was climbing up, I looked back and could see torchlights and could hear people talking back where I'd last seen John, and that was the first time I was a little bit concerned.
After jumping down outside the grounds, Neil Murphy made his way round to the front of Hollywood Cottage.
When I approached the front of the property, I looked across into the grounds because I'd heard voices, and there was obviously something happening just inside the property on the ground. But then, after a minute or so, we heard, or I heard, someone shout, "I'll blow your head off." And I realised then, what I thought was a stick could well have been a shotgun. I radioed that to the control that I've heard them saying, "We'll blow your head off." And of course, the flying squad were in there within minutes.
John Fordham had been stabbed 10 times.
Just horror. Just scared.
I was situated in the control room at Scotland Yard, monitoring events. Everyone was full of great expectancy that night. We really thought we were on the verge of cracking a big case and finding out where the gold was coming from. But then all of a sudden, all hell broke loose, and it quickly became apparent, even in the control room, some several tens of miles away, that the evening had turned into a total disaster.
After Kenneth Noye and Brian Reeder were arrested, Neil Murphy got in the ambulance with his friend and colleague, John Fordham.
Well, the journey was horrific. John's chest was moving up and down, his bare chest. It was moving up and down. And I was pleased. I remember being really chuffed with that, thinking, oh, at least he's breathing. I remember saying to the ambulance, well, at least he's alive, he's breathing, it's going well. And he said to me, no, he's not. He said, that's the oxygen I'm giving him. blowing out his lungs. He's not breathing. He's in a bad way.
Detective Constable John Fordham, father of 3, died that night.
Once I heard it was a police officer, I thought whoever done that is in trouble. Absolutely trouble. Because, you know, you can't do these things. They're there to look after us, not us to kill them. And that's it.
In the police search at Hollywood Cottage, 11 gold bars were found. But the gold had already been smelted and all markings gone. No one could say whether it was Brinks-Matt gold or not. The police operation had been a failure.
Not only did we lose a loyal and particularly well-liked police officer, but also, following his death, the investigation collapsed. And the chances of us ever recovering the gold bullion, which we so desperately sought to recover, dissipated that night. It was a total disaster.
And it was not only a disaster for the police, but the events of that evening would make Kenneth Noye a marked man for life.
Late this afternoon, Kenneth Noye, his wife...
When Noye was first arrested after the stabbing of Detective Constable Fordham, he was brought to Dartford Police Station. It was here that Anthony Brightwell came face to face with Kenny Noye for the first time.
As soon as I walked in the interview room and saw Noye, he came towards me to shake my hand, which I immediately recognised as the handshake of a Freemason. And I formed the opinion that here was a man that was showing out to me in hope that I was a fellow Mason that would help him.
Yeah, I sent it training.
I could tell from his mannerisms that he was a man that was used to being manipulative, used to getting his own way, who was looking for angles and for help continually. Continually throughout the interview, he was looking at ways where he could help himself in a situation where he was beyond help, basically.
But the act of killing a police officer would leave no room for compromise.
But killing a police officer, the most serious offence that I know is a former police officer. No going back for Mr. Noye. No deal broking, no way out. He's on his own.
John Matthew, Noye's defence counsel, was one of the country's leading barristers at the time. He had his work cut out for him.
Somebody attacks a police officer with a knife and stabs him 11 times to death, and an unarmed police officer. And I think that if you just string those few facts together, the general perception is, well, how can there be any justification for that?
Kenneth Noye's justification was self-defence, and in court he gave his version of what happened that night.
Noye was in his kitchen and went out, got from his car outside a torch, and also grabbed, because it was in the car, because he'd been cleaning the battery terminals with it, there was a kitchen knife in the car as well. He went into the wood, quite openly, flashing his torch and calling out, "Who's there?" And in the light of the torch, at night, in the wood, Noye is suddenly confronted face to face with a man in a flak jacket and a balaclava helmet.
Oi!
Noye, of course, said, the whole thing was so frightening, I thought I was being killed. I didn't think I had a chance of living. I was fighting for my life. I was in a total panic, and I was just, this man was on top of me, and I was stabbing away with this knife in a frenzy.
John Matthew persuaded the judge to allow the jury to experience Hollywood Cottage at night for themselves.
This evening, under heavy guard, Noye himself came here to view the house and grounds, along with the judge and jury.
We went down, and it was a dark, blustery night with a little bit of moon, and we went into that wood, and I tell you, it was really quite scary even then. And I think that probably created a good deal of effect upon the jury.
It took the jury of 7 men and 5 women 12.5 hours to reach their verdict of not guilty. When the verdict was announced, Noye and Rita shouted to the jury, "God bless you all." Kenneth Noye added, "That's what I am, not guilty."
The man in the street was absolutely amazed and felt it was a travesty, but of course the man in the street hadn't had any of the evidence.
The jury were in a difficult position, and they chose to believe that, police officer acted lawfully in the grounds of a property, receives 10 stab wounds, and that's okay. That's lawful. The jury let him off with it.
Well, I would have said it was self-defence, because what was the man doing in his garden? I mean, was he a burglar? He didn't know he was a policeman.
People were saying to me, "What an amazing result." And I would say, well, it wasn't really. It was always on the cards. And I think it was the right result.
Kenneth Noye's not guilty verdict would only enhance his reputation for Houdini-like powers in the eyes of the tabloid press. But his luck was about to run out. In a separate trial, he was found guilty of handling the Brinks-Mat gold. Kenneth Noye was sent down for 14 years. But even this long sentence was not enough for some who would never forget the conviction they thought had got away.
Police officers have a phrase that they will come again. And what we mean by that is, if someone gets away with it at court where police officers feel they were guilty or know they were guilty and they walk away with it, we expect that they will reoffend and be convicted next time. So justice, in the end, usually works out.
Whatever happened to Kenny then after that? I don't think anything. I don't think they got in anything. No matter what, if he got caught nicking a bit of fish out of a shop, they'd have made it bad for him.
Only 2 years after Noye was released from jail, Stephen Cameron was killed. No one could believe that Noye would risk putting himself in police sights once more, and in such dramatic fashion.
The story went into the stratosphere. Kenny Noye, a famous multi-millionaire criminal involved in one of the most high-profile murders, was an incredible, sensational story, which everybody wanted a piece of the action of. Police had wanted to nail Kenny Noye for anything for years to come, simply because he was a very high-profile criminal. They hated him because he'd killed a colleague. The idea that he could have been wrapped up in something like this at first was extraordinary, and then they became incredibly excited at the prospect of hunting this man down.
The story that the police were looking for Kenny Noye begged an important question. How did the information get out?
I knew there were people within the police organisation that were prepared, whether it was for money or not, I don't know, but were prepared to divulge information about Kenneth Noye, a police killer, and there's still police officers who are prepared to give a national newspaper information that didn't help me when that was published.
Apart from any leaks to the papers, Superintendent Nick Biddis was haunted by Kenny Noye's old reputation.
He has a reputation whereby, because of his wealth, that he can influence and corrupt police officers.
From now on, Nick Biddis would run his investigation on a strictly need-to-know basis.
You've got to be extremely careful because of this reputation he's got, of who knows about it, who's involved, whether you tell somebody, whether you tell this person, whether that person taken in. Need to know, and if you don't need to know, don't tell them.
Once the story was out, sightings of Kenny Noye were being reported to the police from all over the world.
There have been sightings of Noye in Lanzarote, where it's claimed he's been living in a luxury villa. He's also said to have been to northern Cyprus. And the speculation that Noye plans to have surgery to change his appearance and buy a ranch in Brazil.
All sorts of places. He couldn't possibly be in all of these places, but people, well-meaning or otherwise, and I've got no reason to believe that they were anything other than genuine calls, ringing in and saying, I think I've seen someone who looks like that man you're looking for.
The tabloid press was having a field day.
It got to a point where, you know, Kenny Noye was being spotted on the moon almost. It was getting ludicrous. I mean, the idea that Kenny Noye was coming in and out of the country, having a few beers with his mates and then hopping back on a plane back to wherever he was, it was ludicrous.
We had reported sightings or reports that Kenny Noye's best friend's daughter's going to get married at a certain location. Kenny will not miss that wedding for the world. He'll be there. We had reported sightings or reports that he was at or going to an old friend's funeral. He wouldn't miss that funeral for the world. He'll be there. We actually went to more weddings and funerals than Hugh Grant, and that's with all the repeats as well.
Kenny Noye was as elusive as ever. Kent police had to check out leads in 10 different countries. But he didn't go to Brazil, or Eastern Europe, or France. He went to Spain, long known for its Costa del Crime. But Spain had its dangers for the man on the run.
Because your mug's sent over, your photo's sent right over there, because naturally they think you're gone to Spain. Or they might know you're gone to Spain, so they send a mugshot over you. And everyone's looking for you then. Plus you're in the papers here. And everyone knows you're here. So when the tourists go over there, they bump into you, if you use these places where everybody else uses.
The police got a tip-off that Kenny Noye had fled not to a busy tourist area, but to the more remote southwest coast of Spain. It was one more lead to follow up. John Jesusek was one of the 2 officers who were picked to check it out. He was under strict orders to keep the operation to himself.
Nobody knew apart from the SIO at the time, Mr. Biddies, that we were in actual fact going out there. I mean, we weren't even allowed to tell our families where we were going.
I just couldn't afford to let anyone outside of the small amount of officers, perhaps no more than 5, know what we were doing. Because if it got out and was reported upon, it would have blown the lid off this, and we just could not afford to do it.
Sending 2 officers to a foreign country without going through the official routes, with no backup, to trace a known police killer was a huge gamble.
It did cause me a lot of heartache to think that I'm sending 2 officers out there with absolute minimum backup, and I'm asking them to try and find Kenneth Noye. Don't forget, when John Fordham was killed, he had the backup of a full team, and he was stabbed to death.
Every day we had to report back to Nick Biddies what we're doing, where we're going, who we're seeing, and also he was ringing us at all times during the day, you know, morning, noon and night, just to check in up on us.
The phone goes, I think it was about 7:30 in the morning. Much routine really, and it was one of them ringing me up, and he said, "Governor, we've just seen him, it's him." That was a eureka moment, because now, 2 years down the line, I knew where the man was that I believe had killed Stephen Cameron.
So Kent police knew where their man had gone. But how could they bring him back? To get Kenneth Noye arrested in Spain, they had to show they had enough grounds to charge him with murder. For this, they would need an eyewitness who could identify Kenneth Noye as the man who had killed Stephen Cameron.
I saw his knife and I was pleading with him not to hurt Steve, and I couldn't go near him because I felt he would hurt me.
The crucial eyewitness to the killing of Stephen Cameron was his fiancé, Daniel Cable. Superintendent Biddies was about to embark on a new and daring plan to get Danielle to identify Stephen's killer in his bolt hole in Spain. After 2 years pursuing Kenneth Noye, Nick Biddies had him in his sights, and now he wanted to bring him home. For this, he needed the prime witness, Danielle Cable, to go out to Spain to come face to face with the killer of her fiancé. The man who would be responsible for Danielle was Kent's ID officer. He has requested not to be identified in order to protect his family.
I thought, well, this is going to be a nightmare. When you're taking out a member of the public and a critical witness to a serious offence, you really have got to be careful of her welfare as well as your own. If we went out there and our cover got blown, we'd be hung out to dry if anything did go wrong.
Even Danielle wasn't told where she was going. Secrecy, once again, was paramount.
I'd picked her up on that Friday. She thought she was going to the north of England, and a few hours later she finds herself in Spain.
Daniel Cable was taken to the area near Barbati. To identify Kenneth Noye in a public place would be fraught with dangers.
There's so many things that can go wrong at any given moment of the day or night, because we'd have to get close enough to the suspect to give the witness an opportunity of seeing whether she could recognise him. And the nearer we got, the more danger it was of being discovered and our cover being blown.
When the time came, it was in a very public place that Danielle had to attempt her identification. Keeping up the surveillance on Kenneth Noye, Kent police officers thought he had gone into a busy fish restaurant with his family and friends. It was now or never.
Immediately you came into the light, you were in full view of all the customers that were sitting at the tables at the front of the restaurant. And there were no vacant tables, so we couldn't even sit down and try and blend in and then give Danielle a chance to look around.
With her blonde hair, Danielle was already attracting attention. There'd be no second chances. If Danielle failed to pick the suspect out, the police officers would be going home.
And then we had to walk to the left into the bar, and we couldn't go any further. Then I asked Danielle to go and stand at the open window and view the whole restaurant from that position. The Spanish officer went to the far side of the window, I remained near side, but I told Danielle not to stay in the window for too long before drawing to one side or the other. And try not to draw attention to the fact that she was looking, just glance as a matter of fact.
It was on her second glance that Danielle recognized the man sitting at the end of the table.
She started to get physically distressed, and I knew that she'd identified Kenneth Noye. I thought someone is going to look up in the moment and say, why were those people hanging around that window? Or did you see that blonde girl? I was very concerned that we ought to get out of there as quick as possible, but not draw attention to the fact that we was fleeing the restaurant. The adrenaline was pumping. At all times, my fear was that Danielle was going to be seen to be distressed, and that would draw attention from one or two tables. We were on our own, and we didn't know whether anybody from that table was getting up to follow us out to that car park, because we daren't look round anymore. We daren't give the game away. We just wanted to get out.
The killer of Stephen Cameron had finally been identified as Kenneth Noye. The very next day, Superintendent Biddis had his arrest warrant, and Kenneth Noye was arrested by the Spanish police and taken to Cadiz police station. There he gave a false passport with a false name, Alan Edward Green.
Tonight, Kenneth Noye is being held in the southern Spanish city of Cadiz after being arrested in connection with Stephen Cameron's murder.
Nick Biddis had been waiting for this moment since May 1996.
Kent Police have been in liaison with the Crown Prosecution Service during the past few weeks, and with the assistance of Interpol, this arrest has been effected?
I mean, you know, Superintendent Bidders basically turned over the press. I mean, you know, he got his revenge, as it were, by pulling off, you know, what was a coup to actually sort of finally get his man, despite what he would say, you know, the press getting in his way, despite, you know, his the police informants giving wrong information, to have had all this mess, all this publicity, to have been pilloried in the press, to finally to have nailed his man on his own terms, and to get Kenny Noye. I mean, yeah, let's not forget that Kenny Noye was his ultimate prey.
Noye was eventually taken back to England under armed guard to Dartford police station. Notoriously camera shy, he was caught here on this Kent police camera.
Kenneth Noye arrived at the Old Bailey with a police escort this morning.
1 year later, under heavy armed guard, Kenneth Noye stood trial at the Old Bailey for the murder of Stephen Cameron. In the witness box, Noye denied that he picked the fight in anger at Danielle's driving. Instead, he said he was the victim, not the perpetrator of rage. He said he thought Stephen Cameron was someone he knew and got out of his car only to be confronted by a man in a fury. He said he got out his knife to fend off Cameron, but exhausted by a fight he could not win, and fearing that his own knife would be used against him, in desperation, he ended up stabbing him. His plea, once again, was self-defense.
He had a major problem there, didn't he? Because here was somebody who now twice had killed with a knife, and both times his defense was self-defense. And of course everybody knew about the police murder, and therefore he was up against it.
The jury took a day to return their verdict. 11-1, guilty.
Well, of course he's been unlucky. I mean, he's had 2 things and he's had 2 fights and they both died. You can't get no luckier than that.
When I heard the verdict, my basic gut reaction was, yes, thank you, justice has now been served.
Delight, ecstatic. I got a phone call while I was at work, on the phone, I think within seconds of the verdict, and I was absolutely ecstatic.
But the constant press attention in the previous 2 years, and the suspicion that Noye had already been tried and convicted in the tabloid press, still makes some uneasy.
I think there must be the gravest suspicion as to whether Noye could ever have had a totally fair trial as a result of the publicity.
I don't honestly think that too many people would remember the name of Stephen Cameron, but they will Kenneth Noye. Stephen came from a family, pretty unremarkable family really. Ordinary life, had his life in front of him, and this criminal, already set on a path of criminality, just comes along, wipes him out and leaves him for dead in the gutter. That boy deserves better than that, and I'd like people to remember the name Stephen Cameron rather than Kenneth Noye.
100%, I saw the knife go into his chest and I saw the blood. You know, I would never forget those.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you there soon.
Leave a like and subscribe.